Awesome. All right. So what we're really talking about is the tax mandate, what states are going to be next. Let me see if I can scroll through this. All right. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about what Washington did. Hopefully there's a baseline of knowledge for everybody on the webinar this morning about what the state of Washington a couple of years ago, they implemented a long-term care coverage, state-funded long-term care plan via an income tax, payroll tax to all of their residents. The summary on that is how Washington did it was sort of a baseline for how every other state shouldn't do it as far as implementation, the lead up, the ramp time. Anybody that was doing any kind of business in the financial services sector, no matter what product you were selling, was impacted because every carrier that offers long-term care insurance, in addition to everything else, was impacted. Just from a pure processing standpoint, it was a nightmare. It really blew up the industry, really showed some of the carriers, ourselves included, where our shortfalls were in our operational departments. So all that being said, what you need to know is what Washington implemented, because what Washington did is going to be probably something similar to what California is going to do. And Washington instituted a baseline policy, I don't say policy, coverage, baseline coverage of a maximum benefit of $36,500, which equates to about $100 a day for about a year. So that's what every resident in the state of Washington who did not have private long-term care insurance, which allowed them to opt out of the plan and opt out of the tax, this is what they have. So let's look at quickly this state map, just that California being highlighted in yellow, and obviously we're going to talk about California specifically today. But what you do need to know is the landscape as far as the other states that are considering similar type legislation, all based upon of what Washington did. So California is likely to go next. I would presume that California is going to go next, but all of these other states are considering similar type legislation. And what we know in the industry historically is as soon as a few states start getting that ball rolling, others are very quick to jump on the bandwagon. And at the end of the day, we're talking about the why. It's really this. Hopefully everybody, I don't think it should be a surprise to anybody, specifically in California with Medi-Cal, Medicaid, everywhere else. These programs are in serious trouble. They're underfunded. They're running out of money. They've got more and more folks accessing the benefits. And at least the smart thing for the states are doing, they know that they're in trouble and they have to do something to help alleviate the tension on these programs. Because if they don't, I'm not really sure what the alternative is. So from that perspective, I can really get behind what the states are trying to do in providing some kind of long-term care benefit to their residents. And that is ultimately what the state of California is trying to do, is mitigate the number of folks that are going to needing to access Medi-Cal benefits. I mean, it's a real big summary. We could go into all of the detail of what's happening with Medi-Cal, but that's really what it is. It's interesting because I can't remember how long ago it was, but the state of California just raised the qualifications for Medi-Cal as far as how much the spend down amounts. They raised the spend down amounts, which is kind of contrary to what I think they would do given a program that's in serious financial trouble, but they did. So that allows more people to access Medi-Cal benefits. I think in the short term, that's probably good for the consumers in California, but in the long term, like I said, the funding of that program, we're in trouble. So this is a snapshot here. This is taken directly out of the feasibility report that the task force in California put together. So this isn't anything that I made up. This is the 5 plans that the task force is considering. What we're seeing in print and hearing some of the task force meetings, I have a couple of colleagues that sit in on those meetings. It looks like they're paying particular attention to option 1 and option 4 as ultimately their recommendations to the state of the plan that they want the state to provide. For our purposes and for some of our analysis, we're looking at sort of we're including option 5 in our discussion points, because we all need to know sort of what we're looking at from that perspective of what the maximum benefit could be. So $144,000 potentially, segue that back to option one, $36,000, similar to Washington. And this is where I'm going to give you my opinion. And it's pretty adamant. And I know we're recording this line. So again, this is Bridget's opinion, not that of OneAmerica. There is no way the state is going to go with, assuming they pass this legislation. And I believe that they will. When? I don't know. But I do believe that this legislation will pass. There is no way, in my opinion, that the state can go with the $144,000 benefit for residents. Not because I don't think that they should, but I think there's no way they can fund that. I think the tax bases they would have to charge to fund that for California would be so, it's insurmountable to get passed at the state level. I just can't see it happening. I was talking with an actuary last week, and I think we'd have to have it'd be somewhere up, I think in the, I don't know, 0.96%. I mean, I'm throwing out that number. I just don't see it happening. If they figured out a way to make that happen, to fund a plan like that, then okay, I just don't see it happening. What I really see getting through is option one, which is the $36,000 maximum benefit with a tax basis of 0.56 to 0.58%. Again, I'm running those numbers by my actuarial friends. They think I'm pretty on target with that, and that certainly is what we're seeing in the feasibility report as well. So what does that mean for residents in the state of California is, okay, you've got a state-funded long-term care plan that's going to cover $36,000 in a benefit, period. Massive shortfall there, right? So we know that that's not going to make a dent from what we see from a claim standpoint for anybody that has an extended healthcare event. So what does this mean? It's coming. When? We don't know. What? We really don't know. I've kind of told you what I think, but what options can we give to our clients, right? So that's the next part of this. What options do our clients have in participating in this program, not participating in the program? Do they have an option to do something else? The answer to that is yes, they do. If they have private insurance, private long-term care insurance, and what we're seeing in the feasibility report is that there's a little bit of a caveat there. Washington didn't do this, but it looks like California is going to. If they have private long-term care insurance that provides a greater benefit than what the state will provide, they can then be exempt and opt out of the tax. But they have to have that plan in place before the legislation gets passed, and this is where it gets a little dicey. So let me just kind of repeat what I just said. A private policy to be exempt from the tax that provides a benefit greater than what the state is going to provide. I just told you we have no idea what the state's going to provide, right? So we're kind of, as one of my colleagues says, we're kind of selling blind in this. We don't know what the state's going to provide. So how do we plan for this? How do we talk intelligently about this to the clients that we're working with? At the end of the day, if we're solving the need for a long-term care or an extended healthcare event, my guess is that any plan design that you would recommend would far exceed what the state is likely to approve. If I take that one step further, if you offer a OneAmerica solution with unlimited benefits, right then and there, you have already exceeded any of the 5 plans that the state might approve. So you're good. There's a lot we don't know. There was some talk about inflation protection needing to be required. I got a lot of questions about this about a month or so ago, because the task force was considering that. Then they retracted and said, hey, we need to go back to the drawing board because there's a lot of solutions in the marketplace, OneAmerica being one of them, where we have inflation protection available, but we don't have it on the base policy in California. So how would that work? What does that look like? The task force kind of took a step back and said, hey, maybe that's not a recommendation we want to make to the state. Remember, the task force is just making recommendations. Ultimately, it'll be at the state level to determine what they approve. I could argue with anybody, and I'm sure all of you could on the call with me, if you have why would they want to add inflation protection on or make that a requirement? Because they don't want these folks to be able to go on Medi-Cal. So in order to prevent that, they want the benefit growing, right? But again, if you have lifetime benefits, you're never going to run out of long-term care benefit. Therefore, you're never going to have the need to go on Medi-Cal. So it mitigates that. So that's my argument for OneAmerica. And of course, it's unique for us because we're one of only 2 carriers in the entire industry that offers lifetime benefits. The other is a traditional carrier. So we don't know, but again, if you are talking to your clients about long-term care planning, first and foremost, and you're talking to them about this plan that may be coming, we don't know all of the ins and outs. There's a lot we don't know, but let's put that aside and let's really talk about the need for a long-term care plan and putting potentially an insurance policy in place. I think you'll find wherever you land from that sales standpoint is going to far exceed what the state is going to offer. If you're trying to just hedge your bets and provide, put something in place so that for the sole purposes of the sort of, this sounds bad when I say tax evasion. I don't know, but to avoid having to participate in this program, I'm not, for me, I would not be comfortable doing that. There's too many unknowns. And as a long-term care planning advocate, I wouldn't want to recommend that you do that. Let's just get back to the business of long-term care planning with our clients, and then I think you'd be fine. But this is what you need to know that's coming. Now, okay, so that's a lot. Let me just take a minute here and kind of put this out there. So build this slide out for you so that you can see what we're looking at here. Let me make sure I don't go ahead. So what we know. Exemption possibilities, right? So I'm not going to read the slide, and I'll make these all available to you. Our slide deck is compliant. So Sean, I can send that to you, and you can send it out to everybody that was on the call. But in order to be exempt, I talked about the plan. I talked about having it in place before the legislation gets passed. There is some fine print that we're seeing that's a little concerning. Now I'm going to tell you what it is, but I'm going to tell you that I don't think that there's any way that this is going to happen, and I'll tell you why. So when the task force is putting the actuarial data together, they have to put a stake in the sand. They have to have a date that they're modeling off of, because their projections are 75 years in the future. So the model date that they're using is a legislative approval date of 1/1/2025. That doesn't mean that it's going to get past 1/1/25. It's likely the earliest that it could get past 1/1/2025, but that's the date that the task force is modeling off of. In that model, what they've determined is that you'd have to have a private long-term care insurance policy in place in order to be exempt from the state mandated program 1 year prior to the approval date of the legislation. So the models using a 1/1/2025 legislative approval date are then using a 1/1/2024 date to determine whether or not a resident could opt out of the state mandated tax. So we're thinking 1/1/2024. Last time I checked, it's August 17th. If I'm a lawyer, if they did that, I'm gonna litigate that immediately. And I was having some candid conversations with some folks about that as well. I can't imagine the state approving that kind of a timeline and as early as 1/1/2024. It's what's being modeled, all based off of the approval date of the legislation. So every time that legislation date gets pushed past 1/1/2025, that 1 year window prior gets pushed too. I still have a hard time believing that the state wouldn't get into some kind of litigation and trouble trying to basically remove choices from the residents of the state of California. I just don't see it happening, but I'm not at that level, and I'm not in the weeds on it to know sort of what the dialogue is there. My message to you all is, again, we're educating our clients on what's coming. Most consumers in California have no idea that this is even on the docket. I can tell you that I was talking with some other agents that are doing some Medicare planning. I know that window of time's coming up pretty quickly. And when they bring this up, is anybody familiar with AB 567? Nobody knows what the advisor is talking about. So, we need to start. I know we're all pretty diligent. I saw some of the names on the call, so I'm familiar with some of you. And I know that, we're pretty diligent about long-term care planning and bringing up the conversation. But now, no more so important than ever, every client that you're in front of, I don't care how old they are, frankly, bring up the conversation that this is legislation is being talked about. what it is, what it means, just so that your clients can make choices. Educated choices, and that the decision is put back to you and them from the planning standpoint. But it's our job right now to make sure that we're talking about this. And I can tell you why we're being so careful, and why I'm trying to be so careful in some of the language that I'm using is my colleagues and I don't know how many of you maybe were able to jump on. About three weeks ago today, we hosted a panel discussion with almost all of the wholesalers from OneAmerica in California, talking about this in particular. And it was really prefaced with, this is what we think are, I'm going to say our expert opinion on what we're reading, because we did have some consumer advocacy groups popping up with concerns about insurance carriers talking about this from the perspective of a fire sale. So I'm just going to be super candid with you guys. That's not what we're trying to do. Definitely not what we're trying to do here at OneAmerica. What we want to do is just educate you to the degree that we know, so that we all have a level playing field when we go out there. So I know that's kind of, I'm repeating that over and over again this morning, but it's really important that you take that into consideration, because at the end of the,
I'd like to toss out one comment. I mean, it kind of is a fire sale, because if we look at what happened in the state of Washington when they implemented it, it shut down the entire industry. All the insurance carriers that were selling long-term care stopped selling long-term care products to residents in the state of Washington. They couldn't handle it. And that state doesn't have near the population of California. So I'm expecting the same type of thing. I mean, the industry is going to get crushed once this gets passed. Wouldn't you agree?
I would agree, except what we're seeing in California, lesson learned from Washington, is they're not going to give any lead time, right? So when that legislation gets approved, it's, you either had a private insurance policy day before or you didn't.
Yeah.
What we are seeing, though, this was asked of me yesterday when I was talking about this, is if a client of yours purchased a private long-term care insurance policy after the legislation gets approved, the question was, could they opt out then? What we're seeing is the answer to that is no, they can't opt out, but they may have the option for a reduced tax basis as compared with somebody who doesn't have a private long-term care insurance policy. As you can imagine, behind the scenes, again, Bridget's conjecture here, the state needs as many people participating in this program so that they can, because it's going to help fund Medi-Cal for everybody else that's still going to have to go on Medi-Cal. So you can kind of see how this is balanced here. But so to your point, Sean, yes, we're going to be impacted to a certain degree, but if they move forward with the no lead time, then I don't think we'll see it in the volume that we saw it in Washington, because Washington it was about 8 months of everybody trying to put something in place so they could opt out entirely of the tax. It doesn't look like the state of California is going to give that option.
I noticed on your chart that there was a contribution cap. Could you explain that? I mean, do people just have to keep on paying this tax as long as they have earned income, even if they're working through their age 70s, or what's the deal on that?
Great question. I don't know the answer to that. More to come on that. There's a lot of detailed questions like that I've been getting. I just being straight candid, I don't know. I will make sure that if you don't have it already, I'll send you the documents that we used in the webinar a couple of weeks ago. One is the feasibility report, its entirety, but it's like 137 pages. But what accompanies that, and this is open to everybody, we pulled it directly from the task force. So they made it available. There's an FAQ piece that's part of the feasibility report that may have a little bit more detail in it for you on some of those instances. I can't recall that I saw that off the top of my head, but we can use that right now. That's all of the information that we have from the task force to be able to answer questions like that. Somebody else was asking from a business owner perspective, if it's going to be a payroll tax, what does that look like? Is it going to be administered something similar to health insurance? All great questions. I don't know the answer to that.
And what I've kind of calculated based on what was done in Washington, and option one on your chart seems very similar, is if you go through underwriting and get yourself a private long-term care policy, you're going to get twice the coverage for half the cost. I mean, so anyone that's earning an income in California should, do this. I mean, you're going to save money, you're going to get a better policy, you're going to be able to opt out of the tax.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So like I said at the onset, the benefit of this is if it's bringing more awareness to long-term care planning, then I'm all in for that. And we want to make sure that people have choices. And that's really at the end of the day what we want to do. I mean, and you're likely going to have some clients that the state funded program is going to be it. that might just be, for whatever reason, largely probably financially, that they don't want to or can't put a private insurance policy in place. I think we could argue that we probably could still come up with something that it could premium comparison to tax basis, it's better. But for some folks, this may just be what becomes available to them. But again, they need to know what's coming. Let me see what I've got next for you guys. So this is going in terms of what we don't know. A whole lot. There's a lot we don't know, which is a little frustrating to be in sort of that kind of position, but it is just stating it, and I think it's everything that I already talked about. So, if we go with the highest option, again, $144,000, $6,000 a month for 2 years. What minimum benefit would an insured need? Again, if you're showing lifetime benefits, that mitigates that. I mean, I like, that's not a bad plan. A 2-year plan, $6,000 a month. I mean, we know it's not great, but it's not bad. I just don't see how the state's going to be able to fund it. I just don't. But if you're thinking in terms of, what should you be doing, to make sure that your clients are in the bucket of opting out, that's something that you need to consider. But again, this is just consumer awareness. I actually wanted to kind of have a discussion with some of the consumer advocacy groups that did pop up and talk, because some of the messaging that I'm seeing from them is to wait to see what happens, wait to see what the state approves. And I'm going, I think that's a bad that's a bad plan, because if you wait, you might not have an option. You might not have a choice. And so,
plus you're always healthy till one day you're not, right? Got to get into underwriting now.
Exactly. So it circles all the way back to, Sean, what do you talk about all the time? What BGA talks about all the time, what I do every single day is long-term care planning. We have 10% market penetration, meaning that, only 10% of the population over the age of 65 in this country has a private long-term care insurance policy. So, and that number hasn't moved. I've been in the business for over 25 years, and I think I could probably say maybe 20 years ago it was maybe 8 or 9%. So we haven't moved the dial a lot. So we've always said that we need to do a better job of talking about long-term care planning. And I already said this before, but I'm going to say it again. Now's the time, because we want to make sure that consumers have choices. We also want to do the right thing by our clients to understand what is long-term care, right? The vernacular in and of itself doesn't always speak to the clients that you're working with. We've heard extended healthcare event sometimes translates a little bit better to describe what we're talking about. Do your clients understand what Medicare will and will not pay for? If they have a Medicare Advantage plan, do they understand how that, I'm going to say, doesn't coordinate with Medicare, and that there are limitations with that, and that if they run out of those benefits and they still need care, what resource, what asset are they going to tap into if they don't have private insurance? And I can tell you one of the trade secrets from one of my top producers. He has been a top producer. I've represented multiple carriers. He's been a top producer with all of the carriers that I've been with, and continues to be. He's a fantastic gentleman. He's out in Alabama. First question he asks his clients is, let's put insurance aside. If you were to have an extended healthcare event, simply, how are you going to pay for it? He frames that better with, what asset are you going to look to first to help cover the cost of your care? What he's trying to do is, in the discovery process, uncover where their assets are to see if he can take that and reposition it, likely into a OneAmerica solution, because all of the options we have available to do that, to provide them more benefit in and of itself just by transferring it from the left hand to the right hand, and providing them a better benefit and showing them a better way to do it. So it's simply just starting out. What asset are you going to tap into? And let's see if there's something better out there for you. And it helps you uncover, is it a CD? Is it an annuity? Is it qualified money? Where is it landing? And then you can pivot from there. And it's one simple question at the onset.
And typically it's people pulling money out of a qualified plan, paying a 30% tax and using what's left over, where for 30 cents on the dollar, you can get yourself a OneAmerica policy to cover that risk.
100%. And we're starting to see, I think those conversations are starting to happen, Sean, more regularly And we're definitely seeing more qualified solution applications coming in, both inside of California and outside. So that's certainly an avenue. So for those on the call that might not be familiar, and I won't go into the level of detail, but OneAmerica is the only carrier in the marketplace that can take qualified money and put it into one of our solutions. It doesn't mitigate the tax. It doesn't take away your clients having to pay tax on moving the money over, but we spread it out. In California, we specifically spread it out over a 20-year period. And then they have a fully funded asset care solution, whole life base, most of the time, lifetime long-term care benefits. We do it outside of California. We do it over a 10-year period. But it's a fantastic solution. And it leverages those premium dollars. It will provide them more long-term care benefit than dollar for dollar what they'd be tapping into if they didn't have a plan in place. So lots of options out there. But again, just starting with the question, if you were to have an extended healthcare event, what asset are we going to tap into first? California folks need to know that this legislation is on the table, AB 567. The task force is looking at this and meeting regularly. 1/1/2025 would be the earliest effective date potentially. I really don't want to do that 1/1/2024 date, but we all need to know that that's a possibility. I think we're far off, but it's there. And we just need to make sure that our clients know what's coming. And I have no doubt that this legislation is going to get passed. When? I think probably the sooner the better, frankly, from the state standpoint with Medi-Cal, but we all have to keep remembering that we're going into an election year next year. I don't know what Gavin Newsom's political aspirations are, although I think we could probably guess. So I'm not sure where he's going to land on wanting to implement a tax like this. But I think it's all something that we need to be mindful of as far as what's coming, but it's going to be our jobs to educate the clients out there, the consumers out there. I don't see it happening on any large scale from anywhere else. So I really wanted to get ahead of it. My colleagues really wanted to get ahead of it and let you know what we know, kind of be the task force bullet points for you. But again, nothing that I'm showing you is based on anything other than the task force feasibility report. It is straight out of there. And so that's what we know. So I'm happy to continue these conversations as we know more and as more gets developed. I'll send you the slide deck because we did get that complied. So our compliance team looked at the feasibility report and looked at what we wholesalers had put together to make sure that we were okay there. Just know that it's changing and evolving, but I'll do my best to educate everybody on those changes and as they come. But Bridget, this is what we need to know. Yeah.
You make a comment, like, for example, a lot of people own insurance products that have a chronic illness rider or a critical illness rider. But it's my understanding, based on the proposed laws, that will not suffice as far as eliminating the California LTC tax. It needs to be a 7702B compliant long-term care product like OneAmerica has. Is that a correct statement?
That is what we're seeing today. Absolutely. I can tell you in Washington, chronic illness riders, anything outside of a 7702B did not qualify for exemption purposes from that program. So you are correct in what we're seeing today, Sean. I don't know if they're going to change that at all. I think that's being brought up, but right now what we see is that it has to be 7702B, to the point where, again, my actuarial friend I was with last week, he mentioned to me some life insurance carriers, I'm going to say to remain nameless only because I don't remember who he said, he kind of threw out some names, that they were refiling their chronic illness riders to be 7702B contracts in order to be able to say that their policies, or in order to have their policies be able to be part of the exemption if somebody had them. I don't know. I would assume that would have to be on new business going forward as opposed to anything that's already in place. But it was a very interesting conversation to have, that some life insurance carriers who are not in the long-term care space, because again, I would remember the names that we were talking about. But for you guys, that might be interesting to maybe look and see who might have refiled their products to have their riders be 7702Bs as opposed to what they were before. So that movement alone tell me that life insurance carriers are paying attention to what we're seeing as well.
Yeah, as far as that 7702B compliant LTC product in California, there's not a lot of carriers that offer a product. I'm talking about maybe half a dozen carriers that have a product that's going to suffice. So not near as there's a lot more choices in other states.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and lastly, this is just outside of California, which isn't listed here. These are some of the other states that are, in addition to the state map that I showed you, that we're looking at, that the task force, or I'm sorry, that other states have kind of put their hat in the game a little bit. It doesn't look like there's really any that are as close to California. But again, if you're selling in any one of these states, and frankly, I think that state map is going to populate with more states, like I said before, with this sort of snowball effect. You just need to know what's coming so that we can talk to people about it. So that's really what I had for you guys this morning. I know that there was maybe some chat in here. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm looking at a question right now. I'm not sure if I understand it. It just says reinsure ? Qualify for coverage. How will financially pay for the program? I'm not even sure of what that question is. I got a question. Do we have a little blurb we can send to clients? Yes, we do. Send me an email. I have a lot of literature on this topic, including videos, articles, some bullets. OneAmerica also has a tremendous amount of literature. So, contact BGA Insurance, ask for a brokerage director. You can ask for me, Sean Bragdon, and we can get you a lot of material.
And the only thing I would say about that, if I can really interject real quick on that, is just be very careful about what you send out. Don't do what some other unfortunate folks have done. I've actually seen emails that financial planners have sent out. I think there was like at least one or two, so I don't want to exaggerate it, but there was at least one or two where it was emphatic about the dates, emphatic about having to make a decision and a choice. 1/1/2024 was the drop dead date. I mean, they were not careful about the language that they used, and it really was not good. And it's really what got the consumer, advocacy groups up in arms about what they thought the industry was doing. I'm not going to say the industry was a few individuals, but some folks were not careful about what they did, and they went on record to speak in absolutes. And we even had a couple of, unfortunately, some carrier reps, not outside of OneAmerica, some of the other carriers in the industry kind of do the same thing. We can't speak in absolutes because there's a whole heck of a lot we don't know. So I just want to make sure everybody's careful.
Yeah, but in my opinion, most people, even very wealthy people, in my opinion, should get some kind of long-term care policy. It just makes financial sense. I mean, a typical long-term care event in Southern California today is going to cost you about $200,000. It's going to last somewhere between 2.5 to 4 years. In 20 years, that same long-term care event is going to be somewhere between $450,000 to $650,000. And just think about how that is going to deplete someone's estate, where for 30 cents on the dollar, you can cover that risk. Do have another question here regarding, does the policy have to be qualified or non-qualified? We did talk a little bit about that. For the most part, most hybrid long-term care products, you're using after-tax money, but OneAmerica does have a unique structure that would allow you to use qualified money to fund a long-term care policy.
Yep. So we have the option to do either.
Let's see. I think that's going to be about all the other questions. Again, I want to thank everyone for joining. Again, this is Sean Bragdon, BGA Insurance. If you want some more details, if you want a copy of these slides, I'll throw in the email address and the contact information. But give us a call. We're here to help.
Absolutely, and I partner with BGA as well. So, and whatever you guys need, I'm here to support you, and I'll keep you updated as much as I can with what I know when I know it.
Thanks a lot, Bridget. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it too. Have a good one, everybody.